So I was under the impression that humanity had perfected the simple, elegant technology of how a book physically functions. The creators of this book, however, felt compelled, for some reason, to reinvent the wheel, giving us a cover that unfolds down the middle. Exciting. Until you realize it's been done for absolutely no reason and is functionally ridiculous, because the left cover is only half the width of the pages, meaning they flop over it, and the right cover is longer than the pages, so you've got this obtrusive double hinge flapping around. It's a pain in the ass to handle, and the only way to read it is lying flat on a table. If there were any actual reason for doing this, like it facilitated unfolding pages or something, just any reason why, I'd say, okay, that's cool. But there isn't. It's just an inconvenience for no reason other than because some fool was like, hey, what if we did this? And there was not a single brain cell at the publisher that asked why. This is why I cannot stand the publishing industry. It is dominated by thoughtless incompetence. This is obviously worked on by a team of paid professionals. This is their role in society, and they can't even do something as basic and straightforward as this without screwing up. I can't even get into a review of the actual book because I'm stuck at the cover ranting about something that shouldn't even be an issue. They've gone out of their way, gone to extra effort to create an unnecessary problem. Why? How? This isn't me being pedantic or superior. You could pull a random person off the street who has no experience in book design or publishing, and they would know that this cover is obviously and objectively wrong and a bad idea. Yet alleged publishing professionals made this and thought, yeah, this is good and sensible. I mean, even on the back of the book there's a call out proclaiming the theater style cover as if that's a selling point to boast about. Unfortunately, this is a book you can judge by its cover, as the stupefying incompetence is on display at every opportunity, even ones like the cover you wouldn't even think would be issues. This book is nothing if not a rival to the Necronomicon for the world's most sanity-shattering tome, which is a real shame because the idea of this book is fantastic and long overdue even when it was published in 2016. I've always maintained that the best Disney Park books are those that have a specific focus, and that ends up being something of a redemptive quality for this book in terms of its value to a park fan's library. The souvenir maps that have been produced ever since Disneyland's inception are glorious works of art, but because they're created for a temporary purpose as a souvenir or maps that are actually part of the attractions, so you can't really study or take them home with you. They're the sort of thing that if you're not physically at the right park at the right time, then you miss out. So it's such a great idea to finally get a book collecting some of these from all the different parks around the world and time periods. Now, it's important to understand this book is just a showcase of some of the maps. This is not any sort of comprehensive collection of anything or any kind of historically minded archive. It is purely a best-of art book. Likewise, beyond what you can glean from the images themselves, there's really nothing you're going to learn in this book. There's next to no text beyond one page at the start of each chapter, so like 7 pages of text in the whole book, which, if you want to put a positive spin on it, there's consolation in the text not wasting much space once you realize the writing is embarrassingly bad. At worst, the text is baby vomit, insultingly devoid of any value. And even at best, it presents some light overview history about the opening of the parks. If you've never read any Disney Park book before, you'll learn a fact or two, though how much can you possibly get out of 7 pages? But for everyone else, it's just regurgitating the same shallow history and stories you've read a million times before. And this is where it then actually undermines my praise for the value of the book being focused on a specific subject. That sentiment is solely reserved for the images, as the text in no way lives up to that, let alone contributes, since it offers no meaningful information on the subject. It's basic info coupled together from other sources. Not only have the lazy authors made no effort whatsoever to contribute anything original to park history and literature, they've not even provided inside explanations, historical info, trivia, or even any context for any of the maps or artworks beyond just labeling them. There's no interviews with Imagineers or designers or anything like that, or with the added insult of the writing that is here being clunky and amateurish. It's got the scholarship and prose of a middle school assignment. But it gets worse, of course, because the directive for this book is not just to do a bad job, it has to be so inconceivably negligent that it actually makes the reader think they're taking the piss because nobody could possibly be this terrible at their job. By which I mean, as incredulous as it may sound, none of the text pages throughout have anything to do with Disney maps. It is entirely just a short overview history of opening each park. How can you write a book without writing a single thing about the thing the book is about? I hope you're starting to appreciate that I've not been over-exaggerating the inexplicable degree of ineptitude and downright stupidity that permeates the entire book. let's make a book on Disney park maps and then have none of the text be about Disney maps. How is that possible? How can that possibly exist in a rational world? This feels like some sort of Twilight Zone bullshit designed to make me jump out a window. In my desperation to latch onto any positive piece of flotsam in this mess, I'll say that at least the captions are very good as far as labeling the images goes. All of them have captions that give you the year, artist, park, the type of image it is, and where it's from, which is all really good info, but that's it. That's the level of depth and effort you get from this book. Now, I don't think a book like this necessarily has to have any more text than that. It's completely justified for it to simply be a visual book. However, I mention it for 3 reasons. 1, so you understand exactly what the book offers, or in this case doesn't. 2, because there's already text here anyways, which would have actually provided something meaningful to the book. And 3, there is so much wasted empty space in this book that could have been filled with commentary or trivia or anything better than blank paper. And this empty waste throughout ends up being very frustrating for 2 reasons. Firstly, because the book is content light, it's only 140 pages, which is already fairly meager for a book like this that could have filled a lot more. But then to have all this wasted space on top of that just adds insult to injury, because it probably averages out to 1 map for every 2 pages, so only about 70 maps in the book, if that. And it's super disappointing because there are so many equally amazing maps that easily could have been included, but just weren't because they didn't feel like making a better book. Though in the book's favor, I will say there are many other additional images that bring the book's total visuals closer to 100, not including repeats. There's a couple of photos, rough works, brochure covers, they're all great, but the best additional inclusions are the aerial concept artworks for various overviews of the park. Even though they're not technically maps, which some people could justifiably take issue with, I for one think they're thematically and visually related enough to be included and contribute immensely to the visual enjoyment. But going back to empty space, the sizing and layout of the images, and specifically the maps, leaves something to be desired. You know, this is a visual book about maps. If nothing else, this is their one job. They have to nail the presentation of those, otherwise what's even the point of the book? But of course they can't even manage that. And look, to be fair, this type of hyper-detailed art that was designed for a larger format is almost impossible to present 100% satisfyingly in a reasonably sized book. Nor am I saying its handling here is disastrous or that it's ruined the book, but rather they don't even seem to care about doing their best for the main event of their book, when all that's required to do the best is just to do something so simple and obvious, but instead fly in the face of common sense to create problems where they shouldn't exist. By which I mean most of the maps are too small, yet surrounded by unnecessarily large empty margins, and we're talking about usually an inch on all sides, and being able to expand 2 inches in length and 2 inches in width may sound insignificant, and for certain types of art it absolutely would be, but for these super detailed maps, the benefit would be profound, as is evidenced by the few cases where the maps have been taken right to the edge of the page and are much better for it. Why that's not the case throughout the book, why they can't see the problem with using inch-wide margins on every side when these sort of images desperately could have used that empty space, it's so obvious that it's inconceivable there could be so little consideration on their part for it to actually be this way. Again, it's not even that they've failed, it's that they've taken the most insultingly unintuitive and brain-dead route to failure. The book kind of acknowledges the need to show more detail for some maps through the use of frequent close-up shots, which in theory is a good idea. Here, however, the detailed shots are mostly lazily and poorly used, often using them on less detailed maps that didn't need the close-up treatment and so just ends up wasting an entire page. Again, in a book that at best doesn't have enough pages/content as is. Even the format of the book displays the same thoughtless, unintuitive, and inappropriate approach. Almost every image has a landscape orientation, meaning there's no way to present them on these square pages without either having huge top and bottom margins, or running the image across 2 pages and having part of it obscured in the gutter. In the former instance, it wouldn't be a problem if the maps were made as big as possible and taken to the edge and then have the remaining space filled with text or other images, that'd be fine. In the latter case of having the maps cross onto the opposite page, amazingly, this is actually one area that shows occasional flashes of good judgment. If you've watched a lot of my reviews, you may know that the number one thing I despise in book design is when images cross over the page, and I came to this book expecting that to run rampant here and completely ruin it. So I was surprised and somewhat impressed to discover that that wasn't the case. And I mean, look, I'm not saying it's perfect by any means. There are still far too many ways of that being used unnecessarily and or in ways that spoil part of the image, but considering how much I was expecting and how much I usually loathe it and how desperate I am to find any evidence of neural activity taking place during this book's creation, I appreciate that there seems to have been at least some restraint and good judgment on this front. There are instances where making the image bigger by running it onto a second page has allowed more important detail to be gained than what has been lost in the gutter, and that they've tried to make that split occur in less visually important areas of the image. But again, there are just as many instances where that's not the case. But going back to the format, I think it's pretty clear the obvious and intuitive format for an art book with images like this is to have used landscape pages to present them, which would have allowed for less empty space, bigger maps, and less need to run them over to a second page. But of course, that would have been too sensible. Speaking of insensibility, the chapters are organized chronologically, with each one focusing on a roughly 10-year period. However, that chronological organization is then abandoned when organizing the images within each chapter, where instead they are just presented randomly. There'll be a map from 1998, then the next page is 1992, then 1993, then back to 1998, also jumping from park to park and back again. Now, this isn't an actual issue that's causing any sort of problem, but again, it's all just further evidence of the batshit insane handling of this book, that at the chapter level they established this book's going to be organized chronologically, but then within the chapter just abandon that for random disorganization. But wait, it gets dumber. Some of the images aren't even in the right chapters, or perhaps are incorrectly dated. For example, in the chapter that claims to cover 2001 to 2009, over a third of the images aren't even from that period, according to the caption dates. Is the point I'm trying to make coming across here? Is this horse dead yet? That this book displays staggering ineptitude by creators who go out of their way at every opportunity to do something so insanely stupid that it's simply beyond my ability to comprehend. This book is lacking and slacking on all fronts, rife with all the indicators of something slapped together in a thoughtless rush. It's got a stingy page count, the physical presentation is mental, layout is so wasteful and poorly optimized that it sabotages the full enjoyment of the images, and text that is not only disgracefully lacking both in quality and quantity, but also not even on the book's subject matter. On this channel, the focus is on reviewing the book part of Art Book, rather than the art part, which is interesting because it's actually the art that is the most important and influential in terms of one's love and enjoyment of a book, and this is a perfect example of that, because despite the book's creators doing their best to ruin it, the images themselves are still able to shine through and overcome all that nonsense. These maps are so good. Absolutely glorious works of art and an incomparable joy to look at and actually have in book form. I love the variety in styles. Even though it's a very slender book, I still spend ages with it because there's so much to pore over with each image, so I can't imagine a Disney Park fan not enjoying it more than the bullshit detracts. I consider it a treasure and don't regret getting it. I just regret that it's not as enjoyable and as good as it would have been had it not been handled by drooling morons. And so you may think, why not just simply say that at the start of the review and save us all 10 minutes. You're saying, yeah, there are some dumb things, but none of it matters compared to how enjoyable the art makes it, so who cares? Well, I do, because I hate how many reviews have to boil down to grudgingly resigning yourself to that consolation. All of the joy from this book, 100%, is thanks to the images themselves, not anything the book's creators have done, who, if anything, are doing all they possibly can to sabotage that. When making a critical assessment of a book, it's important to separate whether you like it because of the art, or if it's actually anything the book itself is doing. Because the art would be just as awesome and compel the same feelings no matter what book it was published in, so you don't want to confuse that with signifying that the book itself is well done or worthy of praise. It's so disheartening how many reviews boil down to great art, shitty book, and I just think, why should that be the case? If the art, which again was created completely independently from the book, if that's already awesome and what will make you enjoy the book, then the creators are already set up for their book to be great without them really having to contribute much at all. I mean, the best art books are handled by people who are very talented and put in a lot of extra effort doing their share and contributing and enhancing the experience. But at the very least, there's nothing wrong with doing a simple, straightforward presentation where the art is the sole focus and carrying the whole book. That's fine. That's all you need to do. So what the hell is going on here where you have a book whose creators are actually going to greater effort to actively work against it? You know, I'm not asking that they produce a magnificent work. All I'm asking is they not do the dumbest shit I've ever seen. So I hope it's clear my issue isn't, they didn't get my Disney book pixel perfect. It's much larger than that. This book is merely an example of the incredulity and horror that this many things could be this poorly done. How could this even happen? How could this sort of idiocy, negligence, whatever you want to call it, How is this able to exist? I wouldn't mind so much if this book were some sort of laughable exception to the usual high standard of thought and care displayed by book creators, but it's not. Granted, as an example, it's extreme to the point of parody, but like all good caricature is merely a magnified projection of reality, and the reality is an industry of disgraceful standards that are the fault ultimately not of the companies and creators, but of complacent consumers who lap this shit up without any consideration or demand for something better. Terrible books are the result of terrible creators who are the result of terrible consumers. Trying to understand how things can be this way is the most frustrating mystery of reviewing these books. I don't even feel like this has been an actual book review. I don't think it can be when the underpinning issues are so big that really this is just a lamentation of the state of society.